All right, hello everybody. All right, well, it is my honor to be your host for this evening, along with my colleague Britt Eversole. If you don't know me, I'm the chair of the graduate program. I want to welcome everyone tonight to this really, I think, going to be a fantastic roundtable discussion, hopefully some debate, at least Britt's hoping so. And it's part of our School of Architecture Design Research series. And I want to welcome our guests. I will be introducing them in a moment, who are willing to come, some of them from quite afar, to be a part of this discussion. So I'm really grateful in everyone being able to join us today. But first, just a few acknowledgements. I would like to offer the university's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the respect to the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of Haudenosaunee indigenous people, of whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. I would also like to thank the School of Architecture for sponsoring tonight's event, particularly Dean Michael Speaks, who is, I believe, in the back there, and Associate Dean Kyle Miller, as well as I want to just acknowledge our staff. They did a remarkable job here tonight to just get this all set up. I really want to thank the IT team, Andy, Daryl, and Chris, who did an extraordinary job getting this all organized with all the screens that we wanted. So thank you very much. So tonight's event is part of an ongoing annual graduate program design research workshop series. And as chair, I established this to create really opportunities for the grad students to gain exposure to guest professionals who are invited to conduct, in the case of the workshops, an in-person workshop here in Syracuse. We had 3 this year. And the aim of the workshop series and themes were really to provide a view into new kind of research methodologies, new kind of processes and practices that are emergent in the field of architecture and hopefully beyond. And what you see in the presentation here behind me, all of these images correlate to your guests that we have here today. But the one on the end here behind me is a compilation of the last 2 years since starting this research workshop initiative. Last year we had Jeff Toon and Kathy Velikoff from Michigan. We also had our own in-house professors, Hannibal Newsom and David Shanks, last year, as well as Axel Killian from MIT. This year, the theme for the workshop series and the design research workshop efforts was on artificial intelligence, specifically the aesthetic agenda of AI, and how it can potentially change the way we design in the future and to enrich our conceptual and aesthetic explorations. One of the workshops this year was conducted by 2 of our guests tonight, Matias del Campo and Sandra Manager of SPAN. We also had Sabrina Rate join us. She's an artist from Montreal. And the 3rd workshop was with Kory Bieg out of Texas at Austin. He's the AD there in his office, OTA Plus. He was going to be joining us tonight, but unfortunately Kory got sick. So we're sorry about that. But all of the workshops were really a fantastic success, I think. You can see a lot of the really great kind of images and digital work that came out of the AI efforts. Each of the workshops took on a very different approach to AI, and in the hopes that the students could really start to gain some knowledge in terms of how people took on AI in different ways in their own work, and how that could translate to potential methods that they could actually utilize in their own and the students' work as well. All right, so we already actually, just so you know, we already have started to see some kind of influence of the workshops starting to kind of migrate and make their way into a lot of the student research work, and that started it also in the form of the pavilion that you see in the Marble Room. That's an annual student-led pavilion, and the students, really tried to embrace AI and tried to think about ways to kind of materialize that. They were led by Victor Biom-Sung Jo and Yuting Feng, as well as support from Mei Sang Age and Mengan Zha. So thank you very much to them to really kind of making a successful pavilion here. They also brought a lot of kind of interesting immersive experiences together with their pavilion, and they're continuing to work on that over the summer. So please check that out. But tonight, the aim of the roundtable that's going to be moderated by our own Britt Eversole, who will be speaking in a moment, is to really provide some insight into what the role has been in AI in architecture and other fields as well, And also, more importantly, really, where is the role of AI going to be in our future? What are our future aspirations, both academically and professionally? So we pulled together this panel here because we really wanted for you to see a range, that it wasn't just one particular kind of approach to AI, but like where is really the kind of breadth, and how do we start to kind of interrogate this through different lenses. So we have our guests are coming from academics as well as practice. So you'll start to see, and you can see in the work here, that we set this up so that you could kind of correlate between the images there are connected to our guests. You can really start to see that AI takes many different forms, from robotics to gaming, to image, to drone technology, to computation, and to practice and design. So I'm really excited to welcome our participants today, and I'm just going to go through and give you a brief bio. You had a chance maybe to look online, but I want to give them I want to be able to give you some framing of each of them. On your far left there, we have Hamid Ekbia, and he is an associate professor at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizen and Public Affairs, and he's also the director of Autonomous Systems Policy Institute. His research focuses on the political economy of computing and in how technologies mediate socioeconomic, cultural, and geopolitical relations in modern societies. His writings cover the areas of political economy of computing, artificial intelligence, and global development. We then have, next to him is Cas Esbach. He is a project leader and licensed architect at MVRDV in their Rotterdam office. Cas is a licensed architect and holds both a bachelor and master at TU Delft, and his AI interests at MVRDV are to prioritize efficiency, pushing boundaries, forward-thinking methods, and research-driven conceptual thinking in the work. So thank you both. We also have, as I mentioned, we have Sandra Manager and Matias del Campo of SPAN. Matias del Campo is an architect, designer, and educator currently serving as associate professor at University of Michigan. In addition, he holds a position of Director of Architecture and Artificial Intelligence Lab at Michigan as well. Sandra Manager is an architect, researcher, and educator, and is associate professor at the School of Architecture and Design at the New York Institute of Technology. And they both co-founded the award-winning architecture practice SPAN, renowned for designs rooted in advanced geometry, computational methods, and philosophical inquiry. Hey, you guys. I wish I had an AI app for that. And next we have Mark Linder. Everybody knows Mark probably pretty well by now, but he is our professor in the School of Architecture and teaches theory in the graduate program. His research explores design theory and history, considered in a transdisciplinary framework with a focus on modern architecture since 1950. And he and Emily Pelicano are spearheading one of our first directed research groups focusing on AI. And lastly, we have Yara Fageli. She is a French-Lebanese architectural designer working at the intersection of architecture, pedagogy, transmedia, and immersive technologies. And she is a design faculty at UCLA and the creative director of Folly Feast Lab, which was co-founded with Vivian K. Mati, based in California. Folly Feast Lab focuses on designing fantastical experiences that are aesthetically engaging as well as technologically performative. And unfortunately, I mentioned this, Kory Bieg. I want to at least, tell you a little bit about him. He was part of the workshop series. He was supposed to be here today. Kory comes out of University of Texas at Austin, and he's the principal of OTA. And his research work focuses on architecture design, and the research office specializes in new and kind of current and emergent technologies, digital technologies, and fabrication. And that is our panel. Thank you very much to the panelists for joining us today. And I just want to introduce now Britt Eversole, who will be moderating. He is our assistant professor in the Syracuse University School of Architecture, focusing on the areas of design and theory. And so with that, I will give the floor to him to take over with the roundtable. And I just want to thank all of you very much for joining us today. All right, thanks.
So thank you to Julie. Is this on? Yep. Baby? Yeah, it's on. Okay. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for agreeing to participate. A little closer? There you go. Thank you. Let me just briefly explain how we're going to handle the event today. First of all, we've all been in contact with one another for the last few weeks. We've circulated some questions and some prompts to get the panelists already thinking about the topics that we wanted to discuss tonight. What we're going to do is organize the event into 3 sections. We're going to first talk about intellectualizing AI, then we're going to talk about aestheticizing AI, and then lastly we're going to talk about practicing with AI, but I strongly suspect that all those categories will quickly fall apart as the conversation unfolds, and we will quickly go into all those territories simultaneously. Obviously they all interact and overlap, but we're going to try to think of them maybe as different lenses for unpacking this phenomenon that seems both new and on the other hand may not be all that new. We're going to start with that concept in just a second. So we'll go for about an hour and 15 minutes, let the conversation unfold. For the Q&A, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Still closer? Still closer? Still closer? All right. Move it closer to me. All right. So for the Q&A tonight, we're going to do something a little bit differently. On the walls, on the columns in the back of the room and along the side, you'll see a QR code. So during the event tonight, we'll ask you to take out your phones, click on that QR code, and begin to compose your questions. So as opposed to having a Q&A where we pass the microphone around, we're going to ask you to go ahead and write your questions out and submit them to a Google Doc. And then toward the end of the evening, I'll look on the computer over here. We'll pull the questions out and we'll begin to pose the questions to the panelists. But this way, we hope that it encourages more of you to participate, more of you to get your questions on the table. Don't feel like you have to write your name down. If anything, we'd prefer that it were anonymous so that will encourage students tonight to really step up and participate and ask questions. If you do have a question for a specific panelist, just make sure that you write their name at the beginning of your question. And so with that, what we wanted to do was first start by kind of intellectually situating artificial intelligence, not just within architecture and aesthetics, but more broadly within society and especially within capitalist culture. So one of the things that we began to discuss, or at least pose to the panel, was whether or not artificial intelligence should be approached as a novel phenomenon. Last night, Matias del Campo gave a lecture on the topic of AI and on his book on this topic, to which also Sandra Manager is part, of which Sandra Manager is part. And many, shall we say, approaches to the novelty and where the novelty resides in artificial intelligence in the context of architecture were put on the table. I'm going to turn to him first to kind of get the conversation going about where the novelty is. And then I'm going to pass the conversation down to Hamid, whose research clearly is already pointing to the fact that AI is deeply entangled with the environment, deeply entangled with material economies, deeply entangled with political economies, and probably AI has been hiding inside of many of our devices and platforms and apps for quite some time. And I think that's another way for us to begin to approach the question of its novelty. So with that, I'd like to ask Matias to get us started tonight.
Britt, thank you very much for this. This is a great question and one I really love. I think you have to, first and foremost, you have to look at AI with a variety of different lenses to interrogate the problem of novelty, right? If you only take it from a purely technological point of view, then what AI is doing is basically it's taking historical data that exists. It's nothing new, right? You put it into a data set, you put it into a specific algorithm, and then it will start to interpolate between those data points within something called the latent space. And within these interpolations, there is elements, aspects, ideas, concepts, aesthetics, forms that are unknown to us, which means they're not necessarily new. They were there all the time, all along. We just didn't have the mechanism or the machine to look at these things. That's why I sometimes compare AI also to the microscope or the telescope, which basically are devices that allow us to see things through a technological device that we couldn't see before in that form of detail. So you will find things in the latent space that are surprising, different, exotic, strange, optimized. So like all these different criteria that could be interesting for further interrogation. Now, if you don't look at it through the technological lens, but rather through the artistic lens, then the problem starts to change, I think. Because you as a human will perceive some of the things as new or as novel. Margaret Bowden, the grande dame of AI research and creativity, she differentiates between two types of insight into new or novel, which is subjective and objective. Subjectively speaking, if you've never seen a wheel and you invent a wheel, that's big, right? It's going to be enormous for you. But no one else in the world cares because they know the wheel. Yeah? So that's a subjective novelty. Yeah? Objective new ideas are profoundly rare. Things like Einstein's theory of relativity. Yeah? These sort of discoveries that are unique, change the game, and really are new are rare. And they're also rare in any art circumstance, by the way. A lot of art, a lot of architecture is iterative or changes from things that came before. And I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. I think this is like a set of things of how to look at the problem which might be good for our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hamid, would you like to tackle this question?
Sure. Can I take this off? No. Well, thanks for having me here. I always feel at home, although I also feel that out of place because I'm not an architect. Everybody else here at this table is an architect. So if I say something that doesn't make sense to you, it sounds absurd, I already apologize. I'm not going to talk about architecture. With this question of novelty and continuity, this is not only about AI. You know, any human creation has some elements of novelty and some elements of continuity. No question about that. What makes AI maybe different from previous human creations is that it is, at least recent incarnations of AI, they have an opacity and a complexity that makes it difficult for us to see through them. And that's what makes them even more, that's what brings the novelty more strongly out for some of us or for many of us. But to put that in the context of history and the social, cultural, economic structures that have brought AI to here, we can look at different scales of history. We can look at more recent history of AI, which is about, as you all know, it's almost 60, 70 years old, starting with the term itself, 1956, when the term was coined and accepted as a label for what is happening. It could have gone some other way. People suggested other names, but this won the game. That itself is an interesting phenomenon. In the last 60, 70 years, AI has gone through phases, and some people talk about the winters of AI and summer of AI, because the level of enthusiasm among the public, but also among funding agencies, governments, and so on, has fluctuated. It's only in the last 10, 12 years since machine learning became dominant that this seems to be no winter. I wonder if that is going to be true. So I'm not going to assume and take it for granted that what we have seen in the last decade is going to continue to prevail in the way that we have seen in the last 2 years, especially. So that's one thing. But we can go even further back than the last decade or 12 years, looking at the longer history of modern societies, starting with, there's capitalism. There's a strong element of capitalist logic in how AI systems are developed and deployed or used these days. There is a strong element of colonialism in the sense that AI is a tool for dominance by those who have access or who have the resources to build AI systems. In the US, and for that matter around the world, there's just a handful of major corporations who build AI and they let it loose in our societies, and then everybody else has to play along. So there's that history. And then you can find other elements, historical elements. We don't have time to go into those details, but I just wanted to highlight that thinking about the novelty and continuity of AI, we can look at it on different historical scales. And I want to invite you, to just not lose sight of that historical context. Whatever your interest, your favorite scale is, if you want to look at it, just 20 years ago or 200 years ago. Both of those make sense. Actually, you can learn a lot about AI by looking at these histories. I just want to end with one sentence, and that is that if you take that historical perspective, what AI is doing is mirroring human societies. We have created AI, but also AI is also reflecting what we are as a species. And that's how I would like to suggest that we think about AI as a mirror.
Maybe we could just spend 1 or 2 more minutes on this particular topic, because both of you have started to give us different lenses through which to try to understand this kind of historical, but also the contemporary conditions. So I see we've got a tech lens, we've got an aesthetic and a creative lens, we have an economic lens, we have a kind of political lens. Each one of them, though, it seems to me, probably have different territories on which they operate. And it seems like one of the tricks for us tonight is to figure out where those territories begin to touch one another, where they begin to overlap. Whether it's through policy, and I'd like to hear maybe a little bit more about how you're thinking about policy through these particular lenses, especially given that you've just put capitalism and colonialism on the table, and that domination is definitely in the background or potentially in the foreground. But also it seems that one of the other territories is precisely where architects are so powerful in terms of the capacity of the images that architects generate to begin to seed the public imagination with different ideas about reality, different possible futures. It seems like this is one of those points where those moments of overlap might begin to provide fruitful trajectories for us to both talk about tonight, but to think about as a profession.
So this is for me.
Could you talk a little bit more about policy?
Let me answer that question by adding another historical element. Maybe that helps. So I mentioned capitalism and colonialism. I actually believe that post-modernism or modernity has contributed a lot to the rise of AI, believe it or not, because there's a logic of, so in capitalism is, the logic of capitalism is, what is the logic of capitalism? Let me ask you. If somebody asks you, what is the logic of capitalism? What drives capitalist systems? What? The logic of profit, yes, and money and so on. What is the logic of colonialism? Power, domination, right? What is the logic of post-modernity? That's a tough one. But I think it is, in my understanding, it is the logic of delegation. It's at some point we figured that things have become so complex and so messy we cannot do anything about them. So we threw our hands up and said, let's have somebody else take care of this. And what is AI? AI is exactly doing that for us. We have created a mess. That's what I meant by the mirror. A mess in more than one way. Look at the environment and the economy. I don't want to sound, if you put me on this track, it's going to be very sad. So, so I don't want to go that route, but I want to ask you to think about this. Why is it that we find it difficult to get our act together as a species, and then we want these systems to do that for us? That is what I mean by the logic of delegation. And I give the credit, but also the blame to postmodernism for that logic, for that way of thinking. It started with relativism, and then it took us here. Now, with policy, essentially we see this very much at work because, especially in the US, politicians have thrown their hands up. The excuse is that this is too complex for anybody to tackle, so let's have Silicon Valley run this show, right? But that's just an excuse. Because why? Because then it removes the responsibility from the shoulders of those in power, of whether they are in Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C. So how many times have you heard, this? I just faced this last week calling an insurance company to get insurance for my home. And they kept me for half an hour. I'm not making this up. For half an hour, getting all the information. They said, unfortunately, you do not qualify. And I said, why? I said, because the algorithm says that. Have you seen this? Have you faced this? How many? Well, the algorithm. That's a very easy way out. So policy, or the lack of policy, is very much, part of this logic, if it makes sense.
There's definitely like a big problem there. Like, I mean, this kind of following the algorithm, we had this historically already with I was just following orders, right? So we get into debt if we don't. Yeah. This is really super interesting. I have to tell a short story. Sandra and I, we regularly meet other friends from through Zoom that are interested in working with AI and architecture. And at one of those meetings, Kyle Steinfeld, who some of you might know, mentioned, well, actually, if you think about it, it's a profoundly postmodern project. And I was like, oh my God, it's the last thing I wanted to be as part of a postmodern project, right? But if you think about it, it's true. It's exactly what you said before, but also just the way we work with historical data. And literally, we take historical data, we destructure it, we make random noise out of it, and then we construct out of that new imagery. Or new ideas. So this is like a very violent way, actually, to work with data. But it works. It creates, like, all those things you see in the background are based on this simple concept. So this whole, the idea of being, first of all, like a political project in some way, shape, or form, that's going to be interesting because, of course, there's already like political ideas out there that are trying to work through the problem of AI in our contemporary world. Like most famously, I think, accelerationism, right? And accelerationism is applied on both left and right end of the political spectrum, which is really interesting, like weird, and like the right ideas of accelerationism are disturbing to me.
You might want to tell people what acceleration is.
Okay, accelerationism is a concept that came up in the late 90s by people like Nick Land, Mark Fisher, and so on, who were discussing how our technology basically impeds the further development of humanity, the economy as well as the political systems. And there are two ways of thinking about this. The leftist idea, with Mark Fisher as one proponent, I would say, is actually talking about things like basic universal income, like how do we use automation positively for the world? How do we actually distribute the wealth created by automation in a fair way? So this would be like the leftist idea. The rightist idea, with things like Dark Enlightenment, is one of the books that came out of that, is basically proposing pushing technology so hard forward that the whole thing basically collapses. Yeah? And then we have things like totalitarian states, feudalism is one of the concepts that they really are pushing hard, and it's really, really, I mean, I'm just going to say it's questionable. Yeah? So we're going to see where that goes.
Yara, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I'm going to do the same and remove. Yeah, I think it's super important to bring in the political and the colonialist aspect and who has access to this technology, but not only that, like the data set, when you ask, if you use ChatGPT, for example, because another thing that I think we should tackle is what we mean by AI, because I think we might all mean different things by AI, and you might all understand different things by AI. Plus, just a side anecdote, like a few years ago, an ATM machine was an AI. A few years ago, a door sensor that opens the door when you walk in was an AI. So I think it's really important to clarify what do we mean when we're talking about this, because over the year, we don't call an ATM machine an artificial intelligent bank system, but we call it an ATM. And they become so normalized, so there's also part of language. How do we name things and how they enter our familiarity, our own language, and they become normal. We normalize things, and then the new thing is called AI again, and in a few years will be called something different. So I think it's important to clarify this, but what it does is, again, if I look at ChatGPT, at chatbots, it's trained on a large data set of answers, and it regurgitate back to you the answer you're looking for. And I think it's interesting that it is power, what has access. Different languages don't have access. If you ask a question in a different language, it's not really going to be able to answer it for you. It's certain texts that were able to become, OCRs that entered language that you have access to. So there's a lot of documents that it doesn't have access to. And not only that, what it does, it takes the median answer that would be like the most common thing you're looking to, and it gives you that answer. And I think that's quite interesting to think about, that it's so powerful and it's so dedicated that when you ask the answer, like, which restaurant should I go to in 1 year, it's going to give you the average answer. And that's an interesting concept. Like, what is this average answer? What is this average medium that it's giving you? May that be through images or so on, but there's something interesting that it holds that power and all of that, but it also creates this generic medium that is very different from any generic medium that we've defined. Like maybe I find there's something really interesting to do with like policy or history and theory regarding that, medium that it creates.
But I think what is very interesting what you bring up is the topic of, there is no ground truth, because every time you will be asking it, it will give you a different result, right? So it would never be the same restaurant that it recommends. So the fact is now knowing for us that we will never find the perfect restaurant. But it's very important how we formulate the questions. So what we're asking the tools will become much more important than what we get as a result. And then we have to be very good curators.
Yeah, I love that. This is why I wanted to tell you, Hamid, like you brought up the word mirroring, and I always thought of it as mimicking. And maybe there's a difference between mirroring and mimicking, because mirroring is so direct, where mimicking is like it's like the difference between type and I like on the word because English is my third language, but it's okay. But like the difference between mirror and mimicking, there's something that is added or is missing in the mimicking, which I think might. For me, I think, I don't know, I'm like trying to pick a fight, but I don't know what you think between mirror and mimic.
I mean, I have a very positive view of mirrors. So for me, the mirror is really something where I stand in front of the mirror and I think all the universe, from the Big Bang until now, this very moment is now captured within this frame, in this mirror. So everything is there. Everything that ever happened before is now just in front of me. And it is just, for me, is this captured, this moment right now, or is it progressing in the mirror as well? That's my question.
So I use that as a metaphor, but let me expand the metaphor further. So there's an optics involved here. You are visual people, so you know how light behaves, right? When it hits a new medium, right? It either goes through directly, it either or deflects, or reflects, or diffracts. There are still three phenomena, right? Are those familiar terms, right? I think that actually with AI, all of those things happen. There's an optics of AI. Mirroring is one aspect of it, meaning that, it's as if we're looking ourselves in the mirror and see nice, but also not nice things. By us, by we, I mean humanity. But then AI does other things as well. It doesn't just reflect, it also deflects. What people usually call bias. Well, bias is, in my understanding, is a narrower version of deflection. And then it also diffracts, it distorts, right? So if you are not happy with my mirror metaphor, maybe a broader optical metaphor might make more sense.
Well,
Mark.
yeah, I guess I would really want to push back on that and jump on to the mimicking thing, because listening to Matias's lecture last night and talking about diffusion, it has nothing to do with optics, right? And it has nothing to do with vision as it's been, made into a metaphor or a myth of rationality or objectivity or clarity or control and all of those things. So, that's where, for me, naively perhaps, or hopefully or something, it seems to me that AI is fundamentally new, fundamentally different, that You know, and it comes down to that act of mimicking and the way that when you're working with these models, it's like an alien, you know, mimicking a human, or a human trying to mimic an alien. And that kind of interchange, that kind of real-time engagement with an intelligence that, let's just call it post-optical or post, you know, Cartesian or whatever we want to call it, is this kind of opportunity for endless surplus of novelty. And it seems to me that's really important. You know, a lot of the discourse around AI seems to want to turn it into yet another technology that will be normalized, you know, capitalized upon, used as a tool of domination, and of course it will. But it also seems to me that there's something fundamentally different, you know, and so for us as designers, you know, and stuff that Emily and I are trying to do with our students is to isolate or put our finger on those instances where you really have to think differently, and certainly think differently than, you know, the outsourced intelligence model of postmodernism, or, you know, that you're talking about, would have us do, which I think has become super problematic, you know, that we do tend to think or find ourselves the servants of Rhino or learning a new program or whatever. And there's an ease of use with these tools, these models. You know, they're so, you know, that seems to me like the big breakthrough is when they became ubiquitous and everyone starts playing with them. And, you know, so for us to kind of insist on, persist with the generation of novelty, but it's not just novelty of the tool, you know, it's the novelty of how we have to think as designers that seems so important to me. And, you know, I was thinking as a, maybe swerve a little bit, I've been binging a little bit on comedians in cars getting coffee lately. And when you watch what's happening there between those people, you know, I would like design to be more like two comedians trying to make each other laugh than two, you know, magicians trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat, which seems to me, you know, is the old model. You know, and like that the surprise and the joy and the laughter and the fun and the creativity and the competition, you know, between Seinfeld and whoever he's talking to, it's, I don't know, it makes me have hope for humanity in a way that many other things haven't.
Kaz, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, because when I hear everybody talking, I think to myself, like, what are you guys talking about? What does AI mean for you guys? Because everybody's using this, but is it the Midjourney tool? Are we talking about ChatGPT? Are we using about these diffusion image techniques that are being used nowadays? Because it seems like you're saying something about the ease of use, and that creating a lot of issues in some way. So I'm just, that's maybe the thing I'm struggling to understand. Why are we using the word AI, and what does that mean for you guys? Because for me, I use it in my work. This tools, one of these tools that we call AI tools, daily, but I don't see it as an intelligent tool in any way. There is no artificial intelligence, like there's no intelligence in it. It's just auto-completing something.
Well, there's a difference in the generation, right? Because it will never, when you're using these expert systems, then you will know what you create. So you're planning already, you're projecting already the result. Whereas when you use generative techniques, you don't know the result, and it will never produce one thing again. You know, so there's no interpolation in that sense that it will always go back to a result you probably have come across if you're using those tools, that it's hard actually to keep a stringent line of objects. There has been a specific technique necessary seeding, for example, in Midjourney, to be able to create a character, to have a specific character for more than 10 slides, you know. Or if you talk to ChatGPT 4, you can go back 7 instances, and it knows the conversation you have had 7 instances before, but then it totally resets, and you get very different results. Also, I think I hope I can speak for you as well. For the two of us, it's really, we're sitting here with 2 heads because we're using those tools, but we are also in desperate, dire need to construct those tools, you know. So there's nothing for us available yet that fulfills what we are needing. So we need to make them.
Yeah, we are. We're busy with that. That's part of what we try to do. It is super. So I have to react to a few things. I think you're saying some really interesting things. I think indeed we need to make these tools, and I think that's the biggest, most important part of it, is to grab a hold of these tools and not use them as generators for input into our design process. But you can do that. But I think that would be weak as a designer, because I think the idea should come from me, and I should generate output through these tools. So yeah, I think that's somewhere.
I want to maybe offer like a simple view of what AI could be. First of all, I think, and Hamid mentioned that already, AI in itself, artificial intelligence as a term, is problematic. We know that. Even like the people who did the AI workshop in DAF 56 knew that it's a problematic way of describing this. But if you want to break it down to I think the really novel aspect of it is that it's a tool, yeah, but it's a tool that learns, and we haven't had that before. So the real innovation is that it's a tool that can learn particular things, ideas, and so on. So this is the novelty of it. Now the second thing is what Kaz and Sandra were discussing, which I completely agree with, is that we need to look beyond the generative models that are so widespread now, because this is a small aspect of AI only. Like I don't know how many of you were in my lecture yesterday, there's an image of an iceberg in my lecture, where you see on the top, the tip that comes out of the water is things like ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, and so on. And then under the water surface is like a ton of really interesting algorithms, GANs, from, you know, I don't know all the names, it's like 15 or 20 algorithms that I mentioned there. And underneath everything, like the biggest part of the iceberg is the data. And this is where we as architects have a real problem. Like we can go to computer scientists and ask and talk to them about optimization strategies to do something in architecture, or prediction models to predict how a city develops. Like there's amazing ways to use this technology. But we have the problem that despite us having 2,000 plus years of history in architecture, we are considered a data poor discipline, because we were not disciplined enough to do the things like labeling, sorting, putting things somewhere that we can use them in really good, well-designed, trained models. That's what we need to work. And that work is going to be like the next decades in architecture, probably. Yeah? I'm not worried about my job. So, but what I'm saying is, this is also the things that are going to change within the discipline. Like jobs are going to change. They're going to be something different. You have to look through a different lens of what you're doing. It doesn't mean, by the way, that you're less creative or anything. Like finding those things in themselves is already a creative process.
It seems like, go ahead, Sandra.
No, I think I totally agree. I think in the generation and the data set, also to add to Matias' concern, or it's also that we don't have the data sets yet, and we can have these algorithms, but there's nothing to be trained on, you know. So all my students are creating their own data sets. Like for the first 2 months, we're just creating the data so they can run their algorithms on it. So and the problem is that we didn't only have the discipline to label it, but also we don't want to share it. In this very workshop here, I asked students whether they would share their 3D models, you know, with the community, and at least one of the students said no. So it's a question that is very political, you know. So here is where we are. So we had ChatGPT, and we have the problem of authors being very concerned about their work contributing to it. But on the other hand, can we look at it and say, okay, all of us have contributed to it, so we have the right to use it, you know, so to have all the knowledge and all the know-how. So now we have the problem of starting self-censorship of things for like ChatGPT-4, where you cannot use the name of an artist anymore to generate images. It will send you that, oh, I cannot help you with this problem. So the question is, of course, you understand the artists, that they want their work being protected, but on the other hand, they're excluding them from society. You know, we could see this as the biggest social project we ever had, ChatGPT. Everything that everybody ever contributed to the internet is now available to all of us. At least in version 3.5, you have to pay $20 a month to use it in version 4. But at least for a person who has access to a computer, has access to all the knowledge that people are willing to contribute. So I think we as architects have to be willing to contribute our work to society as well, to be able to grow these algorithms, to help them make us smarter and better.
I like the idea of ChatGPT becoming litigious and censorious, pushing back on us. Maybe we could talk a little bit, because I think this is already going in the direction of talking about design methods and design techniques. Yara, maybe you could talk a little bit about how working with these technologies is influencing the way that both you're teaching, but also you're teaching design methods and the way in which your design method is integrated and morphed as a consequence.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think there's different ways, like what's looping behind me is different. It's like maybe 12 years of thinking through AI and changing my mind over and over again. So there's some exploration with text-to-image generation, and then there's me being like, yeah, maybe not, and jumping to something else, like using AI smart agents that move around the space and have, like, it's working with simulation and trying to mimic human behavior and understand how people would move through spaces depending on their interest, if they're hungry, if they're athletic, or so on. It's a bit complicated to explain, but that's something else. And then moving into using AI in efficiency, which I think for me has become the most interesting one, like, you know, nerding out on Gaussian splatter and stuff like that, but understanding how AI can have the power to make the tools, the workflow, more efficient. And I think this is where, Cass, what you were saying was being like, I don't see anything smart about it, I use it in my workflow. And I think, yeah, when you work in a practice that, you know, you're generating an image, and then you can do that more efficiently if you're using a 3D model and then you use AI to image generation to make that a rendering, an architectural rendering. And that we have a huge data set of, like images from street. The Google Street View is like the best data set for what architecture looks like for most people. So I think it's, you know, again, that interesting, like sometimes I try with my students and we input things like concrete modernist building, or like things that don't really make sense as architecture, and we see what we as a society, through our images and words and labels, think that should look like. You know, it's a bit like the memes, like what my mom thinks I do as an architect, what I actually do as an architect. So if you want, for me, like these data sets are like what my mom thinks I do as an architect, or like what society. So I find there's something interesting here. And I'm kind of curious because when I think about image generation, and I'm throwing a lot, but I hope, you know, everybody can take their pick and answer. When I think about text-to-image generation, so when you generate images by inputting a text prompt through whatever you want, I'm always curious, you know, what does it mean, the result? Because of course there's a lot of apophenia happening, right? Like we're reading what we want to read within it. It doesn't produce space, it doesn't, you know, you try to do a joint, it doesn't really work in real life, it just looks like an image of something that could work, right? So there's a lot of interpretation that you need to do to get that image into something that we could call spatial. And for me, architecture is a representational realm, deals with new media. Obviously, this is what my work looks like, my partner practice and my teaching. But I'm really interested in space exploration. Like how do you think creating images leads to creating spaces? And what do you think about this apophenic quality of these images and how we interpret them? And then I think that in the case of CAS, like of course AI image generation is just about efficiency, streamlined workflow, simulating energy efficiency, and all of these, automating code regulation on a building. There's so much it can do, but of course it falls within efficiency. Yeah, 4 things, but go for it.
Thanks. That's a great question. Let me start with saying that we should not reduce things that AI is doing to image generation, because it can do so much more than that. But this is what's common now. This is like the tip of the iceberg. That's what we're seeing, which is good. I gave it some thought to like this whole thing about apophenia and interpretation, which I think you're completely right about. It's funny that I remember like the first time I heard somebody saying that AI is so creative, yeah? And I was like, wait a second, is that true? Can it be that AI in itself is creative? And when you start thinking about it, you're like, probably not. So what's happening there? Yeah? And I think what is happening there is that specifically with earlier versions of Midjourney, with all the things like style gun and style transfer and those things, the results that came out of those first experiments were so strange and so surreal and so weird that what's happening there is not that AI is being creatively creating a surreal image, but rather that we as humans are interpreting that result creatively. So it's a projection of our own mindset into what we are seeing, which would make sense to me because AI in itself doesn't have the consciousness or the concept of understanding anything, by the way. AI doesn't understand anything, right? Just to make that clear. Yeah? It can really go process data in particular ways that creates results that we then, as humans, in this apophenic moment, are like, that is interesting. And one of the things which are, funny enough, profoundly human and super useful doing this is that this ability to read in a mistake something that can be an advantage. So the model falls on the floor and it's upside down. You're like, that's my project. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah. And Sandra disagrees with me here because I know that she thinks we can train it to do that too, which you might be right about, by the way. Yeah. But this is an interesting process. Then the other thing I want to mention is that there is like a variety of different tribes of AI research. It's not just one, right? The vast majority of things we see is based on connectionism, neural networks, things like that. This is like the common things we see. But there is this author, Pedro Domingos, who wrote The Master Algorithm, which I can highly recommend to read. Anyone who wants to have a basic understanding of how this whole thing works, read that book. I think it's really good. And he differentiates between symbolists, evolutionaries, Bayesian algorithms, connectionists. Yeah? And in part, we are seeing those things also in other areas. Like, for example, the Amazon website is full with Bayesian algorithms, yeah, that actually learn your behavior. Yeah? And I could go on with a variety of other examples. Evolutionaries, for example, if evolutionary concepts are like an AI idea, which it is, we should have actually to actually really pay tribute to Carl Schul, because he was one of the first ones to use genetic algorithms, which are basically a form of AI. Yeah. So there is like a whole history to this, and I would encourage every one of you to really explore these variations, possibilities, because there's so much more out there than the visual image generators, the big language models. By the way, there's a problem also with GPT. It does not actually give you like a common answer that you find somewhere. That's not how it works. It basically is a probability machine. It actually calculates the highest probability of the next word in the sentence that it's spitting out. Yeah, this might sound common, but it's a different way of thinking about it. And another thing which is also important to understand that what GPT actually means, right? GPT means generative pre-trained transformer. So it's a transformer model. Transformer models are currently really taking over everything, which is amazing, because it's quite incredible what they can do. But for me, the important word here is pre-trained. So you cannot train your own network, like your own data set on that currently. It's also because training is profoundly expensive. Yeah? So being an architecture office trying to do your own AI models, training something is going to ruin you. I just tell you right away. Yeah? So that's why you have to rely on these large companies or to academia for these forms of training where funding can be found to train those models for particular ideas.
So just to jump in, training ChatGPT 3.5 to ChatGPT 4 costed around $67 million.
But, you know, as I think we would all agree, it's those earlier models that were the most exciting for us, that were the most jarring, seemingly creative, or actually creative. You know, so I think for us to, I see it as a trap to think that we have a data problem. The data problem that we're creating is that it's these models that are starting to generate most of the information out there, right? So most of the information that is circulating is either for other machines or produced by machines. We can't change that. We intervene in it, but it seems to me there's an opportunity for architects and all of that. You know, I always have said for a long time, architecture has something to do with everything. And the fact that there's this wealth of heterogeneous, bad data gives us this opportunity to actually expand what we as architects might be able to imagine as, say, space, right? It seems to me that, you know, even something just like a Rhino model, you know, 10, 15 years ago, or, you know, to me it was like space is changing. Architectural space is not the concept that we once thought it was. You know, it's not in that optical or Cartesian paradigm anymore. There's something else. And, you know, to get back to Kaz's question about what is AI, I mean, what we've been focusing on is not calling it AI. You know, there's people who call it designed intelligence. There's people who call it alien intelligence, which I think is a great one. We've been trying to think of it in the paradigm of synthetic imagination, so that what we're doing when we're using these tools naively is synthesizing, but synthesizing neural processing with silicone processing, machine processing with biological processing, you know, and I worry that too much of the conversation is about the output. What do we do with the output? But, you know, to me, that's not the problem. The problem is, you know, what are the processes of design that we're starting to develop, and how might that change the very nature of design, or the very nature of what the opportunities for synthetic architectural thinking, human, machine, synthetic in terms of heterogeneous across different kinds of information, different kinds of knowledge, you know, and how do we start to use this as an impetus to a kind of imagination that does operate in that kind of mediated reciprocity with machines.
Can I quickly add like two things to this? Number one, the input defines the output. Without the data, you get nothing, right? So you have to, wait. No. So you have to be, this is one of the things that you as a human can completely control when it's about anything AI. Is like what goes, like, you know, garbage in, garbage out. It's an old computer science knowledge, right? So I don't understand what you're saying, that we're focused on the, well, this might be right.
I didn't say you were, I was saying we.
Okay, no, sorry, but the lab in Michigan, like one of the major things we do is data set building for architecture, because we need to do this, otherwise we don't make a step forward. And that, like building the data set is a very conscious effort, meaning how do I avoid cultural biases, racial biases in the data set, and so on. You can reduce them.
Okay.
Yeah, you can reduce them. Not completely eliminate, that's impossible, I agree with you, but reduce them, at least make it culturally more varied. Yeah. So that is an important step. Sorry, just wanted to. There was a,
I feel like this is going to continue over dinner because I want to jump on that. But, you know, I'm thinking to what you were saying before, you know how technology changes the way we design, right? I'm also interested in that. Like, how does the tool we use change the way design looks? So if we say the foam cutter, the iron foam cutter added curves to architecture. And then if you look years later, parametric design with Grasshopper changed the way, because we were able, of course, through tools to compute way harder like mathematics, we suddenly were able to do buildings that look completely different. We're able to do non-standardized pieces for building, and the way buildings look changed, right? So my question, and I'm so sorry, like I'm jumping into questions, but I'm so curious what you all think. So my question to you is, how do you see these new tools that we're using nowadays, image generation, have your pick, do you see that this will have an impact on the way the building we produce or we design? And I don't have really an answer for you on that, so it's okay to not have an answer. Curious for the next generation to see what you're gonna do. But I think that, is there the same similar way Grasshopper or the use of digital architecture back when we ditched tracing paper and jumped to computer and so on? Is there something as radical that this tool is capable to do in terms of architectural design as a form, a space, and not as I can do my rendering quicker and I can check code efficiency better?
I think I can answer this. I think unskilled use of these tools will greatly influence unskilled designers. Just like if you're not capable in Revit, and you walk around here, you see them all over buildings which just look like textbook Revit buildings. You see no quality in them. But I also know with Revit you can design almost anything. But so I think you're limiting yourself by not diving into these tools and learning to speak their language. So in that way, it will influence architecture. We see it now in when we are working with more designers on a table, that people come with the same 6 AI-generated images to the first talk, and it's horrible. It feels like it feels like it's a bad feeling.
I also agree. The first inspiration, I was never really in generating the images, so that was never something I was really super fascinated with, but I can understand the fascination. But I also agree that there is so much potential within AI technologies that we have not even started to dig into, so I see AI already on construction sites, but we don't have communicated with legal advisors, for example, or with the medical field, with the health field, so because we have all this data available to us now, and we have all the same granular information in form of zeros and ones now, so we can combine them all and we can bring this all together into a pool that is really a data mess of what we are, the matrix we are living in, right? So, or the space, I don't want to say space because it's not in architectural terms space, but in something where we can understand now buildings' physique, the materiality, and have an impact, also have at the same time the data of people are unhealthy in this building, so we know that now. Or in areas, in zones where we know that people are forced to live unhealthy lifestyles. So now we can map and trace them and combine this knowledge and use it for design processes. So in my positive view, this could definitely change the way we design, and also the way we call the people and the knowledge we collaborate with, right? So that's why I'm singing always the same sad song of we need people to provide to this data pool, so to generate those masses, and hopefully also I'm asking people to use ChatGPT, intelligent people to use ChatGPT and use it more often because you're training it. So if there's only people who are, asking for the, I don't know, the episode 5 of Star Trek or not, so that's fine. But actually it would be really nice that if people are starting to have a really philosophical conversation with it, so it will be trained very well by very educated people, so that's why I really having a hard time when people are trying to be using it. Oh, my students cannot use it. Force them, tell them to use it so they cannot cheat with it, because they use it, so they have to use it intelligently.
Maybe to add to this, it's a great question, by the way. And I'm completely convinced that yes, it will change things a lot. Yeah, Sandra said already really important things about it, but one thing that needs to be clear is, I want to add something about the ChatGPT thing. You can also use it to code, by the way, generate code, which is amazing. So it's not just
pretty great.
Yeah.
That's amazing. If you've seen Muse, the one that Unity has for C#, it's so good. I mean, you need to understand what you're reading to know if it's giving you, but it's really good for code.
And then the other thing about the way how using AI in architecture design, the funny thing is that there's like a whole bandwidth of things you can do with it. Meaning it can be something super weird and experimental, or it can be something completely, common, boring, I'm not going to say boring, useful, functional, let me say that. And that depends on how you're basically using curve fitting within that system. So curve fitting basically defines whether your results are underfitting, robust, or overfitting. Underfitting is they're far away from the question you basically asked. Robust is a result that's, okay, yes, this is exactly something I can imagine as a result, and overfitting would produce results that are already in the data set, which basically are no new knowledge. And depending on how you dial your weights in these systems, you can basically steer how you're moving through that latent space. I personally am a big fan of sloppy curve fitting. It's not really good. Computer scientists don't like what I'm doing because it's not robust. Yeah, it's not scientific, but it's a way of creatively using that system to provide you with things, ideas, concepts, spaces, yeah, that will contribute to your own design language.
What's interesting in the way in which the conversation has evolved here in the last 15, 20 minutes is, on the one hand, I think in some ways Sandra's beginning to suggest that this is not an individual endeavor, that this is a collective endeavor. This has to do with education, it has to do with literacy, it has to do with experience, but it also has to do with a willingness to be collaborative, to begin to construct these kinds of understandings, but also these actual data sets. Mark is operating more at the level of what is one actually thinking about and doing, because I know that Mark is interested not just in images, but in imaging, which is to say that these are fundamentally active practices that one is engaging in at this point. We were having this conversation last night at dinner that the philosopher Jacques Ellul would argue that when one is using a technique, one is usually not thinking. And yet, I think Mark is beginning to argue, and I think the panelists would probably weigh in on this as well in a positive way, that something very different is happening here when these software platforms are being used to generate these images, to generate these forms. So we have kind of, on the one hand, a sort of collective, collaborative effort. On the other hand, we have the kind of formation of the imagination of the designer. And then Kaz is basically also beginning to put on the table that there's a need for a kind of a judgment to evolve, which is not just a judgment that is, I know how to use this stuff, but I still have to have design expertise. I still have to have design literacy. We still have to produce students who have a design imagination and can use these things in intelligent ways. Otherwise, we've just got yet another intern that we can't let loose on the software because of what's going to come of it. Which raises an interesting question then in context of aesthetics, because I think we have to have that conversation here tonight. I'd like to maybe ask the panel to start to weigh in on the ways in which this is suggesting new aesthetic effects, not just the way in which changing the way we practice, but changing the way in which we think about aesthetics, but changing the way in which potentially the public may begin to develop a very different imagination and a very different literacy about aesthetic effects in architecture.
All right. Yeah, that's a great question. So there's like a problem and something very exciting in there. The problem being that using common models like the ones that exist now makes it very, very easy to replicate existing aesthetics. Yeah, you want a Mies van der Rohe building, you get a perfect Mies van der Rohe building out of it, if you like from the image generators. You want a Kopimmelblau design, it's a bit more difficult because there's not so much Kopimmelblau in the data set to do that, but still, you can do that kind of stuff. So I have already made the argument before in lectures that it opens every door for lazy designers. But if you want to push the system, if you want to explore the darker corners or the unknown corners of the latent space, the tools are there to do that. And I think that there's like I see like the evolution of that idea, and I see also how the numbers are going up of people doing that. So I think that the first fascination with this ability to replicate styles is waning, and you're starting to see people pushing the system to create something that is more akin to a contemporary culture, to a contemporary language. And that a contemporary language in architecture is evolving through that work is evident. I can see that, yeah? I've made the argument before that using artificial intelligence is the first 21st century design method in architecture. Like all the computational design methods that we used until now were basically already developed in the 20th century, like parametricism, agent-based modeling, polygon modeling, like all of the things, building information modeling, all those things existed already in the 90s. They were just perfected, refined, worked over in the last 23 years, 24 years. But what we see now with AI was not even possible 10 years ago. So it really is opening a door for a new possibility to explore what architecture can be. And I think, and can be not only in the sense of just visuals and aesthetics. Aesthetics are a big part of it, but like even more like how can I question program, structure, material, color, like all those things can be, it's a tool of interrogation, as I mentioned before with the example of microscope or telescope, yeah? And that definitely is changing the aesthetics. And I'm very excited about that. I see how it's starting to produce, like this, you see those things that students made in our workshop in the back. So they have like this, the AI has this ability for feature recognition, right? It can recognize elements, things, aspects of historical architecture, and then put them back together to something exciting and different. It really pushes that idea of estrangement and defamiliarization where things are familiar enough to us to recognize them as a building or a house or whatever, but strange enough to provoke us and provoke our attention. And I think these are elements that are exciting because you start to see those remnants that come from neuroscience who explored things like attention. And suddenly it becomes a design tool that creates particular aesthetics. So yes, things are changing.
I think AI converges with a lot of things that have been happening in the art world since postmodernism. You know, beginning with things like performance art and video art, you know, land art, taking art out of the gallery and onto sites or into situations. So these movements that emerged over the last 10 or 15 years, things like so-called relational aesthetics or situational aesthetics, this idea that the artist, the job of the artist isn't to produce some sort of esoteric artifact that taps into humans' innate capacity to experience beauty or intelligence or joy or whatever it is, but rather their job is to coalesce an audience in the production of some kind of an experience, collectivized experience. It seems to me that, you know, that's obviously that's super architectural, even though most of that kind of artwork, even though it utilizes architectural devices like rooms or landscape design or lighting, you know, the temperature, you know, all these sorts of things, don't produce that kind of collectivized, let's say, sensibility, you know, to use Rancière's term. You know, so that to me is an exciting aesthetic possibility of you know, AI or SI or whatever you want to call it. And it's a direction for architects to move into, is this production of sensibility in a broad range of media, which also, you know, builds on, we were talking earlier about how, you know, when digital design emerged in the 90s, there was this idea that architects aren't going to do buildings anymore. They're going to do set design for movies and game design and product design. And there's many people who have done that. But somehow they get excommunicated from the architecture clan because they don't do buildings. You know, and it seems like we have another chance, you know, for architects to really build on the incredibly heterogeneous skill set and historical knowledge that we have about you know, the production of environments and experiences and communities and these sorts of things. You know, so you know, I'm looking at your work and thinking, you know, that's architecture to me. I mean, it's deeply architectural, not in the sense that it's materialized, but that it produces a kind of potential for, you know, the augmentation of human experience or something. That was pretty lame, but you know, something like that.
Maybe one short comment. We shouldn't forget also that architecture is not the only cultural field discussing AI, right? I mean, it's all over the place. Visual arts, poetry, music, like all of these fields are discussing the same things we're discussing today.
Hamid?
Just very quickly, because I think we have to go to the audience. I share that excitement, Mark, although I sound skeptical. I think there's a possibility here, but I have two, and I'm not an architect, so I don't have an answer, right? This is really meant to be a question. I have two worries. First of all, there's the risk of what Yara called averaging or homogenization. This is more likely with language, certainly, but I wonder if that might also happen with the visual arts or with architecture. Is there a risk? Because you emphasize heterogeneity, but I'm worried about homogeneity, that you know, if the same data is fed back into the systems again and again, at the end of the day, we are going to get the same things, you know, repeatedly. That's my concern. The other one is what Mark alluded to, and that has to do with what could be called maybe grounding. Is there a risk of hallucination of visually? Meaning, you know, the AI systems coming up with things that cannot be built, or, you know, building this is a silly example, but, you know, building a door for a building that is only 3 feet high. You know, because the AI system doesn't know that human beings are taller than that. You see, so those are some concerns that I have, but I share the excitement. I don't deny that.
Yeah, I also share the excitement. Like you were speaking, I was like nodding and smiling. That's me being like, yes, yeah, hell yes. I think that, yeah, through simulation, like AI is really great at simulation. Of course, it's impossible to simulate without AI. And like in the technical term of what simulation is, and using interaction or creating, like, of course, my expertise is in interaction, creating immersive spaces and experience. Yeah, you know, experience is such an important part of architecture, and I hope, one can only hope this is a chance number 27 at having that be part of architecture.
Sandra, did you want to add?
I wanted to add to your question. I also have the same thing. If we're working within the same gene pool all the time, someday we're gonna go extinct, you know, right? So we have to widen this our design area, you know, so the latent space. So we have to keep it coming. And for your second, are we generating the same images? Are we getting bored with it? You know, so with the generation, that's something I would like to ask our audience, actually. So.
I mean, you mentioned hallucinations, which is something that I'm fond of, yeah, because there's different ways to see it, right? I mean, computer scientists, the last thing they want is their automated cars to hallucinate boulders on the highway, right? But in architecture, for example, I noticed that results that come out of Midjourney, for example, of plans and sections, they look beautiful. They're like great imitations of plans, but they're completely unfunctional. They don't work. Yeah. The scale is wrong, rooms have no doors or no windows, or staircases go nowhere, but aesthetically they're beautiful, they're great. So as a starting point for something could be good. I think you can use hallucinations creatively, yeah, to push certain aspects.
But it might be interesting just to define apophenia, since it has now come up 2 or 3 times. At least my understanding of apophenia is the human tendency to search for patterns and to hunt for meaning where none exist. Hence this notion of hallucination, this notion of invention, which I think is on the table in the conversation here tonight, but especially in the work that we're seeing on the wall behind us.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, but I like to think in the most simple way possible, because the audience is students. Like if we look at the joint there, we call that image a joint because it's asked to generate a joint, but actually what you're looking at is, just an image of pixels and things, and it might be a joint, it's generated out of joints, but the fact that you're reading it as a 3-dimensional joint that actually exists in 3D space, that's apophenia. Like you're doing that in that moment. When you see it and you're like imagining 3D space and how it actually rotates and you're able to 3D modeling, or like what platforms like 3Dify does, like when you write something, a prompt, or you choose different things and it generates the 3D model. That's not apophenia, but when you're generating an image and then you're putting meaning onto it, like a joint in 3D, then you're doing that thing in that moment.
There's also, you have this wonderful marble room here that has this book-matched marble. If you start seeing faces or animals in there, that's an example of apophenia, or sheep in the clouds. Yeah.
Like a Rorschach, right? That's how you say it.
The problem, of course, is when it becomes mass apophenia, hence QAnon. What we'd like to do is maybe start to open it up to the questions. What's that? That's your specialty. That's my specialty. We'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So again, we've asked you to use the QR code to pose questions. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, please snap a pic of that and go to the Google Doc and upload your question. We'll start with a really straightforward one, which at least 4 people have asked. Kaz, how does MVRDV use AI in their practice?
Thanks for that great question. Yeah, I think it's a fine question to ask. But I think it does a bit under on these interesting discussions that have been had about AI and the deeper meaning of it. And even though, as a very pragmatic guy, maybe I'm not following all of it, I do think it's very interesting and it's very important that we do have discussions like this because it's important to reflect on the role of AI in our design practice. And for MVRDV, we just use it currently for image generation. That's the most practical way right now that we can use it. And for concept development, so it's design input, like with hallucinations we're talking about. So those things kind of help with discussion, helps with client communication, and finally helps with making beautiful final images, which costs a lot less time. Sorry.
But it sounds like it's integrated across the practice, which is to say at many different stages of the design process, all the way up to delivery of a proposal.
Yeah, so that's something we're really busy discussing because of authorship and ownership of the input. It's super important for us not to, disturb copyright laws or get sued or something. So we're very busy not using AI images in final deliveries, but everything up till then, it's fair game just to discuss internally and sometimes under the table externally.
And how are you negotiating those, where you're worried about violating copyright? How does that work?
We ask business development and they discuss with the lawyers and then we'll hear back soon. Because it's not my field of expertise, but I have a vision on it. And It's because if you look at the way we're using AI currently, it's not that we just type something in and we get an image out. I think that's the most basic way of doing it, but we are defining which images are being used. We're adding LoRa's to that, defining the sampling methods, we're seeding, like mentioned before, and we're trying all these things to really control the output. And those images are the ones that we will finally use. Without that control, they don't have a function in the practice, actually. So in that way, we do feel real strong ownership about these images, but we didn't create the modeling sampling method. We didn't create the models sometimes. We've created some of the LoRa's. In that way, we try to get control, but we do not own the whole system yet. So in that way, we don't feel rightful. But if you're a cook, let's say, and you've cooked a meal, and but you got the ingredients from a farmer, and the farmer got the meat from the cow, and the cow was, you know, bred, selectively bred. Who owns the burger on the table? Who's the who has the creative? The cow, or the breeder, or the cow's mom, or the, you know what I mean?
Kaz, can I add something to this, because I think this is super interesting. You mentioned yes, it's not your algorithm. You didn't develop it and so on. I don't think anyone is asking you to do that, or any architect. I think we'd rather have to take a cue from computer science. You can take code of others, but you cite them. You give them credit that you are using their code. You don't need to develop the whole thing yourself.
True, but who do I? Because that was interesting. Because under the MVDV made a LinkedIn post, and I felt I didn't have ownership of the images because I didn't create the model that I based those images on. So I credited the person that made that. But actually, I was thinking about who should I feel like there's way more people to credit at some point. And it's very hard to find that list and to define it accurately.
It's true, but you can look up a paper that actually is working on that and cite the paper.
Right, and also I think in ChatGPT 4 it decide actually that you can use those images commercially. So, you know, you don't really have to ask, and that's always my thing. If we contribute it, I think we all know by now that we are contributing constantly to companies. You know, I contribute to Samsung 24 hours a day, so they get all my information. And with ChatGPT, at least I can use it, you know, so I can make use of it. It's the only one that is open enough for me to make, to get a bit of a benefit, right? So I think it will be, if we have to be thinking non-capitalist in a way that we give away this information, yes. How open, yeah. I know that's the problem. That's absolutely the problem. But can we have an open AI that also is governed by us? You know, so is this?
Principle, yes, if they allow it.
Yeah, exactly.
It would seem the lawyers would have something to say about that. Yes. So another question.
To ask the AI.
Exactly. Another question that's come up in the chat over here regards extending AI to other areas that architecture entangles with. So the topic of sustainability has come up, building optimization has come up, or questions of social justice and the many different expectations that are placed upon architecture as a deeply intersectional discipline. Would you all like to weigh in on that topic?
Just brief, I mean, the lab in Michigan, the RE lab, is exactly working on these sort of questions, like which data do we need to, for example, interrogate and not even an optimization, but for example, prediction models about the sustainability of buildings, right? And what we actually found out, which is quite interesting, is that within the work of architects, we can actually address almost every single aspect and period of a built project, meaning from the inception at the very beginning to you can use AI on construction sites. This is already happening. You can use it for the optimization of material consumption, energy consumption, like all these sort of things. Like, there's two things AI can do really, really well: optimization and prediction. This is the two things that these machines are made for, actually. Yeah, which are both areas that are great for architecture. I mean, by the way, optimizing a building doesn't mean that it has to become boring. Yeah, you just you can control that. You can like dial that in, almost like with a button. How much optimization do I want? Yeah. So these are areas. And the other thing, again, talking about the life cycle of a building. designing, building, maintaining the building over time, and then how do I actually build it back? Meaning, how do I recycle that building at the end? Yeah? All of these elements can be addressed with it. And the other thing which is amazing is that you can do this in any scale, from the pen to the city, to the whole world, actually, if you have enough data. So all those things can be done.
But do I need AI to do that? Like I can work out the life cycle of a building with a pad and pen. So
It's a bit like you ask, I can do the design without Grasshopper, why am I using it? And it's basically efficiency and time. Some equations are too difficult for you to figure out, and you're gonna need to work transdisciplinary if you wanna do this by hand. But I think what it's really good, like adding to what you said, streamlining and efficiency and so on, it's also really good as doing different tasks at the same time. So if you want it to be efficient, code regulated, and think about how it is sustainable and how, so where do you find that like beautiful point between all of these different things? It's great at doing that, which I think is pretty hard to do without like, you know, it's actually like, or at least time consuming to figure out, right? Like I understand that you can narrow down to how it's code compliant, but then if you want to really get it to fit all of these things, you're going to find it like a lot more efficient, and it will show up things that, you know, your expertise and someone who's doing code expertise, all of your brain together, it will come up with something that maybe, you know, you haven't thought about. It's not new, but it's something that, a pattern that you haven't seen because it's very complicated to understand all of that data through 5 different disciplines.
So what this raises is an interesting question that's come up in the chat, which is, will there be such a thing as an AI architect? In essence, not the AI acting as an architect, but rather as a territory of the profession. Rather than it being simply used as a tool, are we looking at a kind of a specialist in the field who's going to be developing a kind of specialist knowledge and a specialist relationship with a set of tools?
I mean, I just think it's exactly the opposite. It's like saying, is there going to be a form architect? Is there going to be a detail architect? Is there going to be a AutoCAD architect? I mean, we all already are AI architects. It's so ubiquitous and so shot through so much of our everyday experience and the construction of mentality and politics and economy, and, you know, so we already are. The question is, what are we going to do about it? You know, and I think that in addition to all the examples that were given just a moment ago about AI design possibilities, you know, I think it has an unprecedented, it offers us an unprecedented opportunity for, you know, what I think is the definition of design, which is the production of potential. You know, architecture has always been virtual, meaning it's tapping into latent potentiality. That's what we do. That's what designers do. And it just seems to me that there is something different about the interactive, reciprocal, synthetic collaboration with this kind of intelligence that, you know, that allows us to, you know, not get swept into the, you know, the sameness, the normalness. I mean, like classicism didn't go out of fashion because we ran out of ideas. You know, formalism, it doesn't get exhausted because we couldn't think of more things to do with it. You know, other ideas came along. You know, there were other inventions were technological, political systems, you know, came along. You know, so I just think we need to stay much, at least a portion of us, you know, need to stay focused on this, you know, sense that there's an incredible opportunity for certain kinds of potentials for architecture that wouldn't be available otherwise, that we don't, you know, we don't want to solve the problems we already have. I mean, we do. We do want to solve the problems we already have, but we don't want to just do that. Right?
I want to go back to the question you had, like, what's the difference, right? I think one of the profoundly differences in conceptualizing between just using digital tools to do design and using AI is The common digital tools that we know are closed systems. It's closed software that can do particular things and has very little communication to the rest of the world. There's exceptions. Grasshopper can do this partially, but only in small parts. What AI does is the complete opposite. It's a completely open system that allows you to tap into huge different areas of data that allows you to inform your design on a level that you could not do before as an architect, which changes the game.
Again, I agree. I'm just gonna make it simpler, in simpler terms. You know, the word evolves and tools that we use evolve. And probably all of you in the room, students, you don't pick up your phone, you text. And you don't remember a time where you used to call a control center and they would like physically like attach you to the person you're trying to call. And I think nobody misses that. There's not a person who's like, oh, I wanted to like move cables all day. So things evolve, job evolves, and there's no threat. Things get added on where like multiplicity is possible. And again, it's really funny, like looking at this discussion maybe 20 years from now or 20 years back, things really do change, and some technology that lose their efficiency just go away. Yeah, how did you call phone operator? I don't know. Yeah. It's phone operators, no? Yeah, an operator. Yeah, I mean, I've seen them in movies too.
Maybe to tie in with MVRDV, because that's actually an interesting point. I think you all remember that whole hype discussion about big data, like early 2000s, mid 2000s, something like that. And MVRDV was doing amazing work in like creating those datascapes and showing like how to think about that. Yeah. Now there is AI. Now we can take those ideas, basically, that MVRDV developed 25 years ago, yeah, and apply them within a system that can really work with that data.
In some ways, that begins to address one of the more recent questions that's been posted, which is how do you rectify optimization and aesthetics? Which maybe gets at the broader conversation of what we've been having here tonight. On the one hand, the development of judgment and expertise. But I think it's interesting that you point to the early 2000s work of MVRDV, where there was an attempt to develop a kind of a way of demystification, a strategy of demystification, a strategy of making visible the immaterial, making visible the mathematical, making visible the quantitative. So, Kaz, is this triggering a kind of a conversation in the firm about a kind of an intellectual project or a positioning of the office and the sort of signature of its approach to design?
I think this is why there is a resistance to it, actually. There's a resistance to AI because it isn't fully under control. You cannot fully understand most of it. We're trying to grab it in a way that we can do reproducible results and really grab it in a way that we can use this big data, all this data collection, and have it inform our design. But currently, it's not able to yet. So that's why so this hallucination, which is really great on the input side, on the output side on design, it makes it very limiting for us in that way, to do this super pragmatic datascaping. Yeah.
I think some of these questions, they feel like they're a new version of an old question. Like optimization versus aesthetic feels like a form versus function question. And, and I don't know if, like, even the question before, like, is there an AI architect? It's the same. Is there a form architect? I feel like these questions are like fardeau, how do you say that? Like something that is heavy that you carry from like a different generation or a different era. And I don't know if these are the questions that I'm concerned with, personally. I don't know if these are questions that cross my mind. And maybe a theorist can talk more about that.
I mean,
no pressure,
I would like to add something to that, because it's a great insight and it's a great question, and has a lot to do with the semantic shifts in language, like how we start to understand things differently in our own environment. So the term optimization is so heavily occupied by the 20th century thinking of optimization, like the German engineer think, right? Like, yeah, gonna make it work, yeah? But in truth, terms like optimization, prediction, like even terms like intelligence or knowledge or like all those things, they're starting to shift through the conversations we're having now. I think we're really on the verge of a completely turnover in terms of intellectual understanding of a lot of terms in architecture, which I think is amazing. So that we can say goodbye to things like optimization in the thinking only as a structural optimizing of material, but rather understanding that it's also, for example, talking about the optimization of an algorithm towards an intellectual, artistic, aesthetic result, right? So these are things that are, I think, exciting.
Yeah, I think you're right, and maybe something that we haven't talked about yet is that, you know, we're using all of these things and they're heavily, they cost a lot in computing power, and they cost a lot, and, you know, the result you see is not something that, it's a bit like people who are like, what is the internet? It's invisible. No, it's not invisible. There's like huge server farms everywhere, and it's physical, and it is impacting our environment, climate change, you know, like so many things that we don't see. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. It's like the hyper object. But I think that, you know, thinking about this technology and us using them, there's also a real problem beyond that, of course, the political, the colonialist who has power and so on. But there's also the repercussion of this technology on our environment, which are immense. So I don't know if it will crash because of that. I don't know what will happen, but I think that there's this huge invisible ghost we're not talking about, which is how much is it really costing us, not in capital, but in environmental impact, right? Yeah.
The question will also be, what is the alternative? And we always have relied on technology to help us go through nature, because nature wants to kill us, you know. So that's the and if it were not for technology and progress, we would not be able to be sitting here, you know. I barely can imagine how my ancestors survived Europe, cold Europe, without heating systems. I don't know how they did it. So.
Yeah, using technology to solve a problem technology created. It's, yeah.
And yet we're having the same conversations that were had in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. I mean, this is a literal repeat. And on the other hand, it's hard to not notice the images that Hamid has brought here, which are showing us not just the environmental impact, but the human impact, and that this is not a technology which is without its extraction processes, and not a technology without its exploitative processes, and not a technology without its impact on labor and equity and the flow of economics and flow of money and so forth. So I think that it's a really crucial question, isn't it? I mean, the answer to that would be to, at some point, to say no. I shall not participate. I shall not do this. And I think, and Sandra's like, absolutely not.
I was mimicking a comic of ours, you know, of a small Spanish boy who would always say, like, stop breathing until he gets what he wants, right? So
right.
I was just like, I'm not participating. I was just mimicking you. It was just mirroring your argument by my physique, through my physique. So.
I mean, there is actually conversation around that. It's not that it doesn't exist. I mean, Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI, discusses this backing up left and right? I mean, the problem of extraction. And I think it's a really interesting point she makes, that extraction can be seen in a variety of different levels. On the one side, of course, the extraction of natural materials, minerals, palladium, tantalum, and so on, that you need to create GPUs. That's one thing. The other one being also the extraction of data from people, right? I mean, that's also a form of extraction. And this is like the dangerous thing where humanity is considered like a mine, like a natural resource, yeah? Which is a very questionable way of thinking about humanity. But this is the ways how data gets extracted today. This is how this is done. And I see at some point this will change, has to change. It just has to be disseminated in the population, that what's actually happening with their own data.
And that's in the definition of techne, right? Like what technology actually means. It's like enslaving human. On this happy note.
Down this happy note, given that it's a little after 7, is there any questions in the audience that you haven't had a chance to put into the chat? You're just barely raising your hand.
Should we, oh my God, should we fight it or any one part of it, or should we not at all? Poisoning art, because there's AI poison technology, refusing to share our art on certain platforms based on their privacy policies, refusing to participate in platforms based on their privacy policies in general, trying to set up our own servers and closed networks.
I can only answer that from a very personal perspective. I don't think there is like a general answer to that. I personally, I'm profoundly optimistic of what this thing can actually do and help us with. I think if used correctly, it can be an enormous, enormous element of progress in our society, generally speaking. What it can do for the world, if we really think through aspects of automation and how they can contribute to economy and even also to ecology, like how we can actually, this is one of the things that might be able to save us from like larger implications of ecology if it's used right. I can tell you one thing, I'm not afraid of the technology. I'm not afraid of the technology at all. But sometimes I'm a little bit worried about the people using them. So the technology cannot do anything about it. It just exists. It's just there. It's just how people use it. And this problem has been there since we started doing fire as humans. Yeah. So this is a general problem. I wouldn't be too worried. Yeah. I think it's good to think about it. I think it's good to be informed about how your data is, for example, being used. I think you can definitely opt out of things if you feel it's right. But at the same time, I think that for example, like one of the things is the arts, yeah, where I had just recently I was in a panel that was only about AI and art. And I had this question from the audience, from an artist who was completely outraged about it, yeah, that they're using his images to replicate his style, blah, blah, blah. I told this person 2 things. Like, number 1, you know that you can opt out of that data set, right? No. Okay, I told him, go to this website. Yeah, I told them there, go to this website, type your name in there, and just say, opt out. Done. Okay. And the next one was that I think it's really hypocritical from artists to say, I have like this unique style that no one ever in the world had. Yeah, that might be right, but where did you get it from? Do you think it came like that from the genius of your mind? No, it's education. You saw these images, you saw these things, it's the things you experience in your life, it's other people influencing your work. You're taking their work to make your own style at the end of the day. So we learn. That's what humans do all the time. Yeah? I think it's totally hypocritical to say, like, I'm the genius creating this style. I'm the genius doing this architecture, right? This whole idea of the star architect, the genius, the soul genius is completely bonkers. It's a 19th century romantic idea from a couple of German philosophers sitting somewhere in, I don't know, Duisburg, yeah, thinking, wouldn't it be great to think like about this, the romantic idea of this, the suffering artist? Why do artists have to suffer? So sorry for the sort of like little rant here, but generally speaking, I'm very positive about it, and I'm looking forward to what we're gonna do with it.
I'm obviously not as positive, you know, there's no question about that. But the reason I asked, when you raised that question, I said fight whom or what, is that I don't think it makes sense for us to talk about fighting technology. That's not the enemy. You know, somebody said many years ago that the one fact about technology is that it's neither good nor bad nor neutral. And that's about all technologies, right? The fight, and it's interesting, I'm excited by the question because I just recently wrote something and I used that very term. We have to fight, but fight for the future of technology, not fight technology. And that future should be taken in our hands. I think that if I were to argue for a fight, it is, that, not to stop, technology, not to stop data. None of that is going to happen. But to put this on the right track so that it is, in the service of the majority, let's put it this way, the public, the society, whatever you want to call it. So there is a fight, and it has to be fought, but not against technology. This is against human beings, humans against humans, as always.
Totally agree with everything there. But just think about what's your off-ramp, like the refusal, great. You don't have to participate in anything you don't want to participate in, or at least you can try. But what's the off-ramp, and it goes back to the same point I'm making, classism didn't die because it exhausted itself, it's because someone else came up with something better, or a whole bunch of people, or different, or more inspiring, and I don't know, I just think that's our job. That's our number one job, right? What's the other thing you would do? But really think about that.
Yeah, it's really just honing your art. In the last couple of days, I was also watching YouTube videos, but I was watching aspiring young violinists and piano players, and I have so much respect for those people who train and hone their craft, so much that there is no doubt about it. But when they play a tune, those people know what they're talking about. If my students can come to this level, I would be very happy, and this is my job, So to make them excited about it, to give them confidence, using it correctly in a way that moves them forward and helps them, helping them understand that those tools empower them, So they give them power rather than, having to use them. Is they want to use it and they want to shape them. That's how I would answer your question.
Just very short, I've done this argument before, that if we as architects do not engage with it and make it part of our culture, somebody else will do it for us. Yeah? So you have to really work on it and think of how it can positively influence the way that you do architecture. Because otherwise, investors, building companies, all of them will just take those things over, and we as architects are not going to be part of the conversation. If we lead the conversation, that's what we need to do.
Or as Giulio Carlo Argan put it, design or be designed. Shall we wrap it up, Julie? All right. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you all for coming.